Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain outside was relentless, tapping against the glass walls of the downtown cafe like a restless metronome. Across the small table, her coffee had long gone cold. Madison Hale, a sharp but weary investigative reporter, stared at the man in front of her with a mix of disbelief and confusion. He was calm, too calm, for what he had just proposed. "Marry me," he said simply, his voice steady, low, the kind that carried authority even in whispers. The words hung between them, impossible and dangerous. Madison blinked, searching his eyes for a trace of humor, but found none. Across from her sat Ethan Ward, firefighter, local hero, and the last man she expected to hear that from. Just 2 months earlier, he had saved her from a burning warehouse, the very one tied to the corruption scandal she was investigating. The same fire that had nearly cost her life and his career. "This is not a joke, right?" she finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan leaned back, his jaw tightening as if the weight of the decision was pressing down on him too. "No joke. Think of it as a contract. You need protection. I need stability. This could work for both of us." Madison stared at him, her pulse quickening. She was a reporter on the verge of exposing the biggest story of her career, the illegal activities of Ward Tech Industries, the construction company responsible for the city's most recent string of deadly fires. The same company Ethan once worked for before he became a firefighter. But now, they were threatening her. Her editor's car had been vandalized. Anonymous calls came every night. Someone wanted her story buried and her along with it. "A marriage contract," she repeated, barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded once. "They cannot subpoena a wife to testify against her husband. If we are legally bound, you are safe until this blows over." He spoke like a man used to risk, used to fire. Yet this was different, this was personal. Madison shook her head in disbelief, her hands tightening around the mug. "You cannot be serious. I barely know you." He met her gaze. "You know enough. You know I would never hurt you." His voice softened then, a quiet ember under all the chaos. "I saved you once, Madison. Let me protect you again." For a long moment, the cafe's hum faded into silence. Outside, lightning flashed over the skyline, illuminating the reflection of two people who could not be more different: a firefighter bound by honor, and a journalist driven by truth. Yet somehow, fate had tied their paths in the flames. Madison exhaled shakily. "You are insane," she whispered. Ethan almost smiled, but his eyes stayed serious. "Maybe. But it might be the only way to keep you alive." She looked away, out toward the rain-smeared city, her mind racing between instinct and survival. Her life had always been about uncovering lies, but now she was being asked to live one. And somewhere, deep down, a flicker of something she did not want to name began to burn, a dangerous warmth she had not felt in years. When she finally looked back at him, her voice was steady. "Fine," she said. "Draw up the contract." Ethan's eyes softened, and for the first time that night, the corner of his mouth curved in a faint, almost relieved smile. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside that cafe, something irreversible had begun, the first spark of a marriage built on lies, danger, and perhaps, the beginning of something real. The next morning, the world outside the window looked washed clean by the night's storm, but Madison's thoughts were anything but clear. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the unsigned contract Ethan had left her after their late conversation. It was printed on plain paper, but every word carried weight, heavier than any document she had ever handled as a journalist. The deal was simple on paper: a legal marriage, valid for 6 months, until the case closed and her safety was guaranteed. In return, she would move in with him, keep up appearances, and agree to the boundaries he had written at the bottom of the page. No emotional involvement. No questions about the past. No press. Madison traced the last line with her finger and exhaled. It was the most bizarre arrangement she had ever considered, yet something inside her refused to call it wrong. When she closed her eyes, she saw again the night he pulled her from the flames, his voice steady even when the building crumbled. He had risked everything for a stranger once. Now, he was asking her to trust him again. She folded the papers neatly, slid them into her bag, and told herself it was only for survival. Ethan arrived exactly at noon, wearing a gray shirt and that same quiet confidence that made her both uneasy and safe. "Did you read it all?" he asked. Madison nodded. "Every word." "It is insane, but I am in." Ethan gave a small nod of acknowledgement, like a soldier accepting an order he already knew would come. "Then let us get this done before you change your mind." The courthouse was small, almost empty, the fluorescent lights humming softly. The clerk barely looked up as they signed the forms and recited the words that made them, in the eyes of the law, husband and wife. No rings, no flowers, no witnesses beyond a bored assistant typing behind the counter. Yet when Ethan looked at her and said, "I do," there was a flicker in his eyes, something steady, something real that made Madison's throat tighten unexpectedly. When it was done, they stepped outside into the soft afternoon light. "Congratulations, Mrs. Ward," Ethan said with a faint, teasing smile. Madison laughed, but it came out nervous. "That sounds unreal." "You will get used to it," he said. His tone was half joking, half resigned, as if the word wife still felt foreign to him too. He opened the truck door for her, and as she climbed in, a new chapter began, one built on paper, bound by law, but shadowed by secrets neither dared to name. His house was far from what she expected. Not a city apartment or sleek condo, but a quiet cabin near the lake, surrounded by pine trees and open sky. The walls smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, a reminder of who he was, a man who faced fire and somehow made peace with silence. "You can use the guest room," he said, carrying her small suitcase inside. "Bathroom is down the hall. Kitchen's yours whenever you need it. My only Rulino touching the files on my desk." Madison glanced at the stack of folders by the window, each labeled with old case numbers and fire reports. "Are those about Ward Tech?" she asked carefully. His expression shifted. "Some of them. Some are about the people they hurt." The room went quiet. For the first time, she saw the guilt behind his calm. He was not just protecting her, he was chasing his own redemption. That night, Madison could not sleep. She stood by the window, watching the reflection of the lake shimmer under the moonlight. In the next room, she could hear Ethan moving slow, deliberate, like a man haunted by thoughts too heavy for sleep. She pressed her hand against the glass and whispered, "What are you hiding, Ethan Ward?" The days that followed moved like a strange rhythm neither of them had rehearsed. They ate breakfast in silence, learned each other's habits without meaning to. Ethan brewed his coffee black and strong, she preferred tea with honey. He woke at dawn to run, she stayed up late to write her reports, her laptop the only light in the dark house. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the line between agreement and companionship began to blur. One evening, while she typed at the table, he set a plate beside her, a sandwich, nothing fancy, just an unspoken act of care. She looked up, surprised. "Thank you," she murmured. "Do not mention it," he said, but there was a small, quiet smile that lingered just long enough to warm the space between them. The contract was meant to protect her from danger, but Madison was beginning to realize it might also be protecting them from something deeper, something neither had dared to name. And somewhere beyond the safety of that cabin, Ward Tech was watching, waiting, and planning its next move. Days passed, and the fragile balance between Ethan and Madison began to take shape. What started as a contract turned into a quiet rhythm neither of them could explain. The cabin became their shared sanctuary, a space where silence spoke louder than words. Madison worked from the wooden table by the window, her laptop open and a stack of case notes beside her. Ethan repaired old tools in the garage or left early for the firehouse, returning each evening with smoke still clinging faintly to his clothes. Their exchanges were simple, polite, steady, careful. Yet beneath each word lived an unspoken understanding, a tension they both felt but refused to name. One morning, Madison woke to the sound of Ethan's truck engine roaring outside. She stepped onto the porch, pulling her sweater close. "Another call?" she asked. He nodded, adjusting his gear. "Warehouse fire on the east side, could be connected to Ward Tech." Her heart froze. "Do you think they are burning evidence?" "That is what I intend to find out," he said, meeting her eyes. "Stay here. Keep the doors locked." Hours later, the TV flickered with breaking news: massive fire, possible arson, one firefighter injured. Madison's stomach twisted until she heard his name listed among the rescued, not the fallen. When he returned late that night, his hands were blackened with soot, a small cut on his cheek, but his eyes still sharp. She helped him clean the wound in silence. For a moment, her fingers brushed his skin, and he flinched not from pain, but from the sudden closeness. "You should be more careful," she said softly. "You should not worry so much," he replied, his voice low. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, fragile but undeniable. The next day, Madison found a folder left on the kitchen counter. It was labeled "Confidential Ward Tech Internal." Inside were photos, inspection reports, and one name circled in red: Gregory Lang, the company's chief engineer. Ethan had risked everything to get those files. She looked up as he entered, rain dripping from his jacket. "You went back there, did you not?" she demanded. "You could have been killed." "You said you wanted proof," he answered calmly. "Now you have it." "That is not the point, Ethan. I cannot protect you if you keep walking into danger." He smiled faintly. "I think that was supposed to be my line." Frustration gave way to fear, fear to something warmer, more confusing. Madison turned away, gripping the edge of the table. "You cannot keep doing this alone." "Neither can you," he said quietly. Later that evening, thunder rolled across the lake. The power flickered, plunging the cabin into dim candlelight. Madison sat by the window, typing her article draft in the glow of her laptop. Ethan sat across from her, watching the storm. "When this is over," he said suddenly, "what happens to our deal?" She hesitated, her hands frozen above the keyboard. "We walk away, like we promised." "Right," he murmured, but there was doubt in his tone. "Just making sure we are still pretending." His words lingered, half a challenge, half confession. She looked at him, rain streaking down the window behind him, and for the first time, she did not see the firefighter who saved her. She saw a man who had built walls not to keep her out, but to survive the fires within himself. A week later, the illusion of safety shattered. Madison drove into town to meet her editor, unaware that a dark SUV was following her from a distance. When she returned that evening, the front door of the cabin stood slightly open. "Ethan," she called out, her voice echoing through the hall. No answer. The air felt colder, heavy. On the desk, her laptop was gone, along with the Ward Tech files. Panic rose in her chest. Then a voice came from behind her, low, mocking, unfamiliar. "Looking for this?" A man in a dark coat stepped out of the shadows, holding her computer. "You should have stopped digging, Miss Hale." Before she could react, Ethan appeared from the back doorway, silent as a ghost, a flashlight beam cutting through the dark. "Put it down," he said. The man smirked, but he underestimated the firefighter's reflexes. In one swift motion, Ethan disarmed him, pinning him against the wall. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man spat. "Ward Tech does not like journalists who marry their problems." Ethan's jaw tightened, and for a split second, Madison saw the soldier behind the calm, the man who had faced flames without fear. The intruder fled into the night, tires screeching against the gravel road. Madison stood frozen, trembling. "They know," she whispered. "They know about us." Ethan turned to her, his breath still heavy. "Then we stop hiding," he said. And in that moment, something shifted between them, not just fear or duty, but resolve, a shared fire that would burn through every lie standing in their way. The next morning came with a heavy fog rolling across the lake, swallowing the cabin in silence. Madison woke on the couch, the events of the night still echoing in her mind: the intruder, the struggle, Ethan's promise that they would stop hiding. She found him outside, already up, chopping wood with methodical precision, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cold air. "You did not sleep," she said quietly. "Could not," he replied, lowering the axe. "I called someone I trust." "We need to move." "Move?" she asked, her voice tight. "You mean leave?" Ethan nodded. "They know where we are, Madison. Ward Tech will not stop. You have proof they cannot erase. That makes you their target." She stepped closer, folding her arms. "And you? What about you?" He hesitated. "They already tried to burn me once. I am still here." The truth in his tone sent a chill through her. They packed fast, driving to an old firehouse on the edge of the city that had been converted into a safe space for displaced firefighters. It smelled faintly of smoke and engine oil, but it was secure. Ethan knew the man running it, Captain Morales, a gruff veteran who eyed Madison with suspicion until Ethan introduced her. "She is family," Ethan said simply. It was the first time she heard him call her that, and for reasons she could not explain, it struck deeper than any contract ever could. In the days that followed, they worked side by side. Madison pieced together her article with the remaining data Ethan salvaged, while he dug through his contacts, connecting the dots between Ward Tech's fires and falsified safety reports. Each night, as they shared coffee in the dim office light, the boundary between pretense and reality eroded a little more. One evening, Madison found Ethan sitting on the firehouse roof, staring at the city lights. She joined him, wrapping her jacket tighter around herself. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Becoming a firefighter?" He shook his head. "No. Saving lives was the only thing that made sense after everything I lost." "You mean the accident?" He nodded. "My brother. He worked at Ward Tech. Died in one of their sites when they cut corners on safety. I joined the department to make sure no one else had to pay that price. But when I started investigating, they made sure I was silenced. That fire I pulled you from, it was supposed to be me in there." Madison's breath caught. "So this was never just about me." "It was never just about one story," he said. "It is about the truth." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind brushed her hair across her face, and he reached out, tucking it gently behind her ear. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of everything they had refused to admit. "Ethan," she began, but he stopped her with a quiet look. "Do not say anything. Just stay safe. That is all I need." The next day, Madison received a call from her editor, his voice tense. "Madison, the article is explosive, but you have to be careful. Ward Tech's legal team is circling like sharks. We need verification." "I have it," she said, glancing at Ethan's folder. "I will deliver it myself." She hung up before he could argue. That evening, she left a note on Ethan's desk, short, clear, and final. "Do not follow me. This is my job." But of course, he did. When she arrived at the newspaper's downtown office, 2 black cars were parked across the street. She felt their presence before she saw the men inside. Her heart raced as she entered the building, clutching her bag like a lifeline. Upstairs, the lights were dim. Her editor was not at his desk. Then a voice spoke from the shadows. "Miss Hale. You should have listened." Gregory Lang stepped forward, the Ward Tech engineer whose name had haunted Ethan's files. "You think one article can destroy an empire?" "No," Madison said, steadying her voice. "But it can expose one." Before Lang could respond, the elevator door burst open. Ethan charged in, fire in his eyes, a streak of determination cutting through the fear. "Step away from her," he warned. Lang smirked. "The hero again. You really cannot help yourself." "No," Ethan said, his voice cold. "I just cannot stand watching people burn others to keep their lies alive." In that instant, one of Lang's men lunged forward. The struggle was fast, chaotic, ending only when security alarms blared through the building. Lang fled, the others scattered, and Madison collapsed into Ethan's arms, shaking. "I told you not to come," she whispered. "And I told you I do not take orders well," he said softly. She laughed through her tears, clinging to him. Later that night, as police sirens faded in the distance, they stood together outside under the rain. Madison looked at him, exhaustion softening her features. "You saved me again," she murmured. "No," he said, brushing the water from her cheek. "This time, you saved both of us." And for the first time since the contract began, he kissed her not out of duty, not for the sake of the plan, but because somewhere between the danger and the lies, something real had taken root. The storm finally broke, and so did the walls they had built to keep their hearts from catching fire. The morning after the confrontation, the city woke to headlines that set the internet on fire. Reporter and firefighter expose ward tech corruption. Madison's article had gone live at dawn, complete with the evidence Ethan risked his life to recover. Photos of falsified safety reports and fire code violations filled every screen. The world finally saw what had been hidden in smoke and ashes for years. Ethan and Madison sat side by side on the steps outside the courthouse, the chaos of flashing cameras and shouting journalists surrounding them. She looked exhausted but steady, clutching the printed newspaper like proof that everything they endured had been worth it. "You did it," Ethan said quietly. She turned to him, her eyes bright despite the sleepless night. "We did it." His lips curved into a faint smile, but the relief was short-lived. Captain Morales approached them with a grim look. "Ward Tech's legal team is pushing for damage control. Gregory Lang is missing. The company's trying to paint this as a misunderstanding." Madison exhaled sharply. "They can try. The truth is already out." Ethan stood, his protective instinct kicking in as he scanned the crowd. "They will not stop until someone takes the fall. Stay close." That evening, the two returned to the lake cabin, now a temporary refuge until the dust settled. The air smelled of rain again, as if the world refused to let them forget what they had survived together. Inside, the fire crackled, throwing soft light across the walls. Madison sat on the couch, her laptop open to the thousands of comments flooding in, people thanking her for her courage, families of victims offering gratitude. Ethan watched her from the kitchen, the glow of the fire reflecting in his eyes. "You changed lives today," he said. She shook her head gently. "No. We changed them." He crossed the room and sat beside her, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "When this started, I told myself it was just about keeping you safe. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that." She looked at him, her heart catching in her throat. "Ethan," he continued before she could speak. "The contract may have been fake, but what I feel is not. I do not care about signatures or rules anymore. I just want the truth between us to be as real as what we fought for out there." Madison's eyes filled with quiet emotion. For the first time, there was no danger pressing against them, no lies between them, only the fragile honesty of two people who had walked through fire and found something worth saving on the other side. "Then tell me," she whispered, "what happens now?" Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was their original marriage contract, folded and worn from weeks of chaos. He held it out to her. "We can burn this," he said. "Or we can start over and make it real." Madison stared at the paper, then back at him. "Are you sure? You know what life with me looks like: danger, deadlines, and never enough sleep." Ethan smiled faintly. "And you know what life with me looks like: sirens, smoke, and too much coffee." "I would call that even." She laughed softly, tears glinting in her eyes. Then maybe we do not need a contract anymore. He tossed the paper into the fire, and they watched as the flames consumed it, the ink curling into smoke that drifted toward the open sky. Outside, dawn began to rise over the lake, soft and golden. Weeks later, Wardteka's executives were arrested, and Gregory Lang was found hiding in another state. Justice had arrived, slow but sure. Madison's article won national recognition, but she turned down every interview, saying only that the story was never about fame, it was about truth and the people who believed in it. One evening, back at the same lakeside cabin, Ethan built a small wooden dock where the water met the trees. Madison joined him, barefoot, the wind catching her hair. "You could have gone back to the city," he said. "Start it over." She smiled. "I already did. Right here." He took her hand, the rough calluses of his palm warm against her skin. "I used to think love and fire were the same, both dangerous if you got too close. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe love is what teaches you how to walk through the fire and come out whole." Madison leaned against him, her voice soft but certain. "Then I guess we both finally learned how to survive." The camera of the world would have seen two ordinary people standing at the edge of the lake, but in that quiet moment, surrounded by the echoes of everything they had endured, Madison Hale and Ethan Ward were no longer bound by a contract, but by something far stronger: the truth, the fire, and the promise that love, when built on integrity, never burns out. Months later, the world had changed, but life at the lake had found a calm rhythm. The chaos of Wardteka's downfall had faded into history, leaving only headlines and quiet gratitude from the families who finally received justice. Madison's article had become a landmark piece in investigative journalism, taught in universities and praised for its integrity. But for her, the story was personal, a scar and a beginning all at once. She spent her mornings writing on the porch, wrapped in one of Ethan's old fire jackets, and her afternoons walking by the water with him when he returned from the station. The city had offered her every possible job, but she turned them all down. "I am done chasing stories about pain," she told him once. "I want to write about healing now." Ethan smiled at that. "You have earned the right to peace." Yet peace, for Ethan, came harder. Though Wardteka was gone, the memories of the fires remained: names, faces, screams and smoke. Some nights, Madison would wake to find him sitting outside under the stars, his eyes lost in the dark horizon. She never spoke. She would simply sit beside him, resting her head on his shoulder until the quiet felt less heavy. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked one night. "The rush, the noise?" He thought for a long moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember what it cost me. What it almost cost us." She reached for his hand. "You saved me from a fire once, Ethan. But the truth is, you have been saving me every day since." He looked at her, and there it was again, that flicker of warmth that always broke through his guarded calm. The next week, an invitation arrived in the mail. Madison had been nominated for the National Journalist Honor Award. She tried to refuse, but Ethan convinced her to go. "You earned it," he said. "You gave a voice to people who never had one." The ceremony took place in a grand ballroom under soft chandeliers. Madison stood at the podium, her speech simple and sincere. "This award belongs to the truth, to those who risked everything for it, and to the man who taught me that integrity burns brighter than fear." The crowd applauded, but she looked only at Ethan, sitting in the front row, pride shining quietly in his eyes. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded her with questions, but Ethan pulled her aside, guiding her out through a side door into the cool night air. "You handled that better than I ever could," he teased. She laughed. "You would have set the podium on fire." "Maybe just a little," he admitted, and they both laughed harder than they had in months. That night, back at the lake, they sat by the water's edge, watching the reflection of the moon shimmer across the surface. Ethan held a small box in his hand, worn but carefully kept. "You know," he said softly, "we never had a real wedding. No rings. No vows. Just a courthouse and a contract." Madison turned to him, her eyes catching the silver light. "We did not need any of that," she said. We had the truth. Still, he said, opening the box, revealing a simple gold band. Maybe it is time to make the truth official. For a moment, Madison could not speak. Tears welled up, but her smile was steady. Ethan Ward, she whispered, you are impossible. That is not a no, he said. She shook her head, laughing through her tears. No. It is the best yes I have ever said. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the world seemed to still, the air soft, the lake calm, the fireflies glowing like quiet applause around them. There were no witnesses, no contracts, only two people who had walked through fire and found love that refused to burn out. The following morning, Madison published her final piece, a short editorial titled, After the Flames. It was not about corruption or power, it was about the courage to rebuild after destruction, the quiet strength of forgiveness, and the beauty of starting again. She ended it with one line, sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is let someone love them after the smoke clears. When Ethan read it, he simply looked at her and said, you always find the right words. She smiled, resting her head against his chest. That is because you gave me the story. The lake shimmered beneath the morning sun, and for the first time in years, there was no siren, no deadline, no fear, just peace, earned and real. Madison, Hale and Ethan Ward had begun as a lie written on paper, but they ended as truth written in fire and faith, proof that even after the darkest nights, love, when honest, will always rise like dawn. By the time autumn painted the lake in gold and amber, life had finally slowed into something that felt almost ordinary. The air was cooler now, filled with the smell of pine and distant smoke from the nearby town. Ethan had taken a part-time position training new recruits at the fire academy, teaching them not just how to fight fires but how to lead with integrity. Madison had finished her new book, After the Flames, expanding on her article and exploring the human side of survival. It was less about tragedy and more about resilience, about the way truth and love rebuild what destruction once stole. They worked side by side most days, their lives entwined not by circumstance but by choice. Yet sometimes, the past had a way of finding cracks in the peace they built. One evening, while they were preparing dinner, Ethan received a call from Captain Morales. A wildfire had broken out in the mountains just north of the city, spreading faster than anyone expected. Volunteers were being called in. Madison froze, knife halfway through a tomato. You are not going, right? She asked, her voice slow but firm. Ethan looked torn, his hand gripping the edge of the counter. It is bad, Madison. They need everyone. You have already done enough, she said, trying to keep her tone calm. You have nothing left to prove. He stepped closer, his eyes steady. It is not about proving anything. It is about helping people who cannot help themselves. You know that. She wanted to argue, to stop him, but the fire in his voice was the same one that had saved her life long ago. Finally, she nodded, her eyes bright with worry. Then promise me you will come back. He touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. I promise. The next 2 days were long and unbearable. News of the wildfire dominated every channel. Madison barely slept, pacing the cabin with her phone in her hand. When the call finally came, she answered before the first ring finished. It was Ethan. His voice was tired but calm. We got it under control. The line held. She laughed and cried all at once. You kept your promise. Always, he said softly. When he returned home that night, covered in soot and exhaustion, Madison met him at the door, throwing her arms around him before he could speak. I was not sure I could go through another fire, she whispered. You do not have to, he said, holding her tight. This one is over. The next morning, the sunrise stretched across the lake in shades of gold and fire, reflecting in the calm water like a quiet victory. Madison brewed coffee as Ethan sat by the window, his hand resting over hers. You know, she said, smiling faintly, I used to think fire only destroyed. Now I think it just reveals what is meant to last. Ethan looked at her with that familiar softness, the same look that had once silenced every storm. Then I guess we lasted. They sat in silence, the kind that feels like home, surrounded by the gentle rhythm of a world that had finally found peace. In that stillness, they understood what the flames had been trying to teach them all along, that love, when honest and unafraid, does not need to burn to be real. It only needs to endure. Winter arrived quietly that year, wrapping the lake and the cabin in a blanket of stillness. Snow fell in slow, deliberate flakes, the kind that made the whole world look softer, calmer. Madison and Ethan had settled into a rhythm that felt timeless: mornings with coffee by the fire, afternoons spent writing or working on the small workshop he had built behind the cabin. The chaos that had once defined their lives was now just a distant echo, replaced by a peace neither of them had ever known. But even peace had its tests. One evening, as Madison sorted through a stack of letters from her publisher, she noticed one envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photographan image of the lake, taken from across the water. On the back, written in messy handwriting, were 3 words: "Still watching you." The blood drained from her face. Ethan, noticing her expression, took the photo and studied it silently. His jaw tightened. "It is them," he said. "Someone left from Ward Tekka's old circle." Madison felt a chill run down her spine. "But the company is gone. They were arrested." "Power does not vanish overnight," Ethan replied. "Sometimes it hides until it feels safe again." He stood, already slipping into his coat. "Where are you going?" she asked, fear lacing her voice. "To make sure we are safe." That night, Ethan drove into town, meeting with Captain Morales and a few trusted officers who still owed him favors. By the time he returned, the fire had burned low, and Madison sat waiting, her eyes heavy with worry. "They are bluffing," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "Probably someone looking for attention. But we will stay alert." She nodded, but her hands were still trembling. "Ethan, what if this never ends? What if every story I write keeps pulling us back into danger?" He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Then we face it together. You are not alone anymore." His words calmed her more than any reassurance could. The days that followed passed in watchful quiet. They double-locked the doors, installed cameras, and checked the mail carefully. Eventually, the threats stopped coming. The snow deepened, the lake froze solid, and the world outside their window seemed untouched by everything they had fought through. One night, as they sat by the fire, Madison leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been if we had never met?" He smiled faintly. "I would have gone on believing that fire was only destruction." "And you?" "I would have gone on believing that truth had to hurt." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "But now I know better." "So do I," he said, kissing the top of her head. The wind howled outside, but inside the cabin, the world was warm, lit by the glow of the fire and the quiet strength of their bond. Later that night, as Madison closed her laptop, she glanced once more at the old photograph, the one that had once frightened her. She walked to the fireplace and placed it in the flames, watching as the paper curled and turned to ash. "No more ghosts," she whispered. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "No more ghosts," he echoed. The firelight danced across their faces, and in that moment, surrounded by snow and silence, Madison Hale and Ethan Ward understood that survival was not just about living through the flames, it was about choosing, every day, to keep the warmth alive after they fade. Spring returned to the lake like a promise kept. The snow melted slowly, revealing the earth beneath, soft and full of new beginnings. Madison watched from the porch as the ice broke apart on the water, sunlight catching the surface like shattered glass turning to gold. It had been a year since the article, since the contract that began everything, and their lives had settled into something whole, something honest. Ethan walked up from the dock, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, his sleeves rolled up, his hands steady. "The water is almost warm again," he said, handing her a cup. "Almost," she replied, smiling. "You say that every spring." "One day I will be right." They laughed quietly, the sound echoing over the still lake. Life was simple now, but never dull. Madison's book had become a quiet success, and she had turned her attention to mentoring young journalists who wanted to write truth without fear. Ethan's Fire Academy classes were full, his students drawn to his calm authority and his insistence that courage meant more than running into flames, it meant knowing why you did. Some evenings, they visited the city, but they always returned to the cabin, to the quiet place that had once been a hiding spot and was now their home. One morning, a letter arrived from the state office. Ethan opened it slowly, then looked at Madison with surprise. "They are dedicating a memorial park on the old Ward Tech site," he said. "They want you to speak at the ceremony." Madison hesitated. That place had once been the center of everything she feared. But then she looked at him, the man who had faced fire to protect her truth, and she nodded. "Then I will go. But only if you stand beside me." The day of the dedication was bright and clear. The ruins were gone, replaced by green lawns and a small garden where names were engraved on a wall, those who had been lost in the fires, those who had fought to expose the lies. Madison stood before the crowd, her voice steady. "There was a time when this ground was nothing but ash. But ash is not the end of a story, it is the beginning of new soil, of second chances. We stand here not to remember destruction, but to honor the courage that came after it." Her eyes found Ethan's in the front row. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to act anyway. And sometimes, it means letting yourself be saved. When the applause rose around her, it was not loud or wild, it was sincere, the kind that carried peace. That night, back at the cabin, Madison sat on the dock as twilight deepened. Ethan joined her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You did good today," he said. "We did good," she corrected. The lake shimmered beneath the moon, and the soft sound of water against wood filled the air. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "And I would not change a single thing." She smiled, leaning into him. "Neither would I." The night grew quiet except for the rhythm of their breathing, two hearts steady after a long storm. Above them, the stars began to appear, small lights in a vast sky, reminders that even in darkness, something always burns bright. For Madison Hale and Ethan Ward, love had not been an escape from the fire, it had been the reason to walk through it and build something better on the other side. Their story, once born from danger, had become proof that the truest kind of love is not written in wealth or promises, but in the simple act of choosing each other, again and again, after the smoke clears.